All right. Thank you everyone for coming to another great edition of the She's Independent Conversation series, an initiative where we gather experts and voices on different topics in the funding and financial ecosystem. Today, we are very excited to have a conversation with John and David of the Debt Free Guys and hosts of the Queer Money podcast. We'll let them introduce themselves shortly. We are also going to be moderated by Natalie Levy, our She's Independent founder and fearless leader. An important topic, certainly in honor of Pride, but to be conversed about all year round. The financial implications and discrimination that the LGBTQ plus community experience, and how that weighs in and comes into whenever we think about investing, the little mind space that we have to even think about investing. And just some different steps that we can take as both individuals and as a society at large to start to close the equity gap in the financial landscape for people in the queer community. So with that, I will pass it off to the Debt Free Guys to introduce themselves, and we're really excited to have you guys today.
Cool. Thank you for having us. I'm John.
I'm David.
And we're the Debt Free Guys and hosts of the Queer Money podcast. Just a little bit about us, I guess. We kind of got into this space after being together for about a year and a half. We realized that between the two of us, we had $51,000 in credit card debt. And the irony was at the time that we had about 15 years in combined service in financial services. So here we were helping other people with their money, helping them save for college, prepare for retirement, have good credit scores, not have any debt. And we were just the cobbler's kids with no shoes. In the process of figuring out how we got into this situation, we realized after many years of discussion and therapy was that we realized we got into that situation despite all the theoretical knowledge, because we both came from times and places when it wasn't okay to be gay. And then when we finally got into adulthood, we wanted to prove ourselves to the bullies in high school that we're actually worth it. And the best way to do that in America is to have all the shiny objects. But then couple that with the fact that we wanted to make sure that we weren't ostracized again by another community. So we did whatever we had to do or felt we had to do to live up to the gay stereotype and to meet everybody else's expectations so that we would have friends.
Great. And happy also to hear, David, if you wanted to share any more, but that was such a great background, John.
Sure.
Now, I won't add a whole lot more. That John and I, because we were in financial services and had life experience, we felt that it was important for us to start talking to others about how they could change and improve their lives financially, primarily because at the time when John and I finally were getting close to paying our debt off, was when there was the financial crisis going on in the United States. 2007, 2008 was when we were pretty close to being done paying our debt off. And what we realized and saw was not only in our circle of friends, but clearly across the country, there were lots of individuals who were living what we call an unconscious money lifestyle, or they were unconscious with their money. And we said, this is the whole reason or why we got into this situation we did. We now need to take on this obligation of talking to other people about how they can change that.
Great. Well, you've already done a really nice job with those intros and, sharing with your backgrounds, kind of that tipping point of what inspired you to focus on financial needs. But let me ask another question, which is, what's the first time you felt that financial impact? Was it a missed role? Was it, a lack of investing? What was the first thing you can remember where you said, wow, I wish I had done, or I missed this?
Yeah, you'll go.
Yeah, I think John and we talked about this beforehand, and both of us feel like there are circumstances in our lives that caused us to do this slightly to ourselves, to actually internalize our homophobia. And hold ourselves back, which is not uncommon for individuals in minority communities, is to feel insecurity and to say, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to do this. For me, I was raised in a very religious household. I was not encouraged to go to college. I was encouraged to go out and preach the word of God. And basically what that did for me was it made me hide and cower about who I was individually. And so I held myself back. It wasn't until I was 26 that I had my first full-time job. We're talking about most kids today, most young people today are getting full-time jobs even before, some of them before they go into college, and some are working full-time jobs while they're in school, and definitely in their early to mid 20s, people are having full-time jobs. So what I did to myself was hold myself back financially in many ways. I held back not only from earning money, but from the regular practices every day in paying bills and actually having that cash flow of money in my mind of knowing what kinds of decisions to be making. So I was holding myself back. But I think for John and I, one of the things that we saw, for one of the first times that we saw that we were excluded was in the good old boys club. Right. A lot of times women especially feel this. They're left out of the invites to the golf course, to the bar, the box at sporting events. And we know what happens at these events. You have the opportunity to network and socialize with individuals who oftentimes are levels above you, and just get your name and face in front of these people and have conversations that allows you to basically say, I know somebody there that I could ask to mentor me, that I could look for as a hiring manager to kind of build your confidence and move yourself up. So John and I both felt that if you want to call it a glass ceiling, a pink ceiling, whatever that ceiling is, we kind of felt like we were excluded from that group.
And I'll add that I think we still feel that today, but just in a different way. Being an LGBTQ plus micro owned and operated company, especially during the month of Pride, we can't tell you the number of major media publications and Fortune 100 companies who reach out to us asking us to speak to their organizations or promote a product or service of theirs on our social media platform or podcast for no money. They want us to do it for the good of the community. They want to help decrease the wage gap between the general population and the LGBTQ plus community, while simultaneously not paying micro businesses who already have tight margins as it is to rainbow wash their company, so to speak, to our demographic. And you would be surprised at the companies, billion-dollar companies like Accenture and JP Morgan and New York Times have all reached out to us over the course of several years, asking us to do what we do for money, but to do it for free for the good of the community. So it's kind of like, we want to guilt you into giving us your time and resources and experience and education, but then you can struggle to keep the lights on.
Well, you've both stepped into your confidence, because the fact that you call it out and you don't say, well, I'm going to do that, just because it feels, it's wrong, right? You know that you have to have that conversation, you have to ask for the money, and you're not going to be taken advantage of. So first of all, congratulations for calling it out. I think we're really big advocates of, speaking up and saying, well, if somebody doesn't show up or an organization doesn't represent and align with us from a mission, standpoint, we're not going to work with them. So that's really, really huge. One other thing that you'd said earlier that I want to, bring up and kind of add to is, sure, these women are, in your community, right? The queer community, you're also not getting the invites to these old boys club, events and, networking that happens in places that you may not even be aware of, what they're doing, because truly we never got the look or the invite. But additionally, and we chatted about this just briefly when we were catching up earlier, the lack of sponsorship, the lack of mentorship, they're so significant for career advancement, for, getting to and through that, glass or pink ceiling. And what happens is there's this kind of organic, oh, well, this person reminds me of, or, this, I feel very comfortable with this, young white man who's straight, and I'm going to groom them because I see myself in them. Right. And what happens if we don't break that is it's just going to be the people at the top taking people that look like them and that make them feel comfortable or make them feel at home. And that's not okay. And so I think recognizing, right, marginalized groups that don't have the representation at the top of the organization, we have to break that, because if we're not getting the sponsorship and the mentorship and being proactive to say, we need this, nothing's going to change. So it's not just those meetings outside the office, it's also happening in the office, right?
Yeah, John and I like to refer, especially for the queer community, but we know this happens for for gender as well as race. We call it cascading homophobia. And what that basically means is you're an advocate for me. Let's just say you're an advocate for me, and I'm a gay man, and I want to move up, or I have a special project I want to pitch to upper management, or I want to be on a project to get more exposure. And you're an advocate and an ally of the community, but your boss either has vocally and overtly, or sometimes insinuated that they are homophobic. They don't like queer people. They don't like people of color. They don't like trans individuals. They don't want to work with women, just by the comments, the jokes, all of those kinds of things. And that plants this seed in your head that says, okay, I want to move up too. I want to advance my career. And I know that if I pick David, I'm going to have to explain to my boss why I chose that person. And that could limit my career. So it's easier for you to say no to me than it is for you to have to go to explain to someone else. And so what happens is we see this pressure from these individuals at the top, the patriarchy, the racism, the homophobia, the individuals who don't want to work with anyone that doesn't personify exactly what they think is the ideal candidate, right? And so that is one of the things that it cascades down through organizations. And that is one of the things that keeps so many of us, so many people of color, so many queer people, so many women in these low level, mostly director or lower positions, because there is that cascading pressure on those individuals to say, okay, I'm just not going to do it because I need to look out for me instead of looking out for other people. And that is one of the things that John and I have both experienced when we worked at Charles Schwab. Regular cascading homophobia coming from senior leaders, individuals, to the point where we said, okay, we can't work, even though this company gets a 100 on the human rights corporate equality index, we can't work for this company anymore because it's performative, that they're paying to get that 100. They're clearly not doing it on the inside.
What important things to call out. And my gosh, the amount of check boxes and, oh, well, we hired, a Black woman to, run our DEI initiative. That does not mean you have a good culture. And that does not mean you're truly investing in the change. So thank you for, speaking up. And listen, we have to, at the end of the day, we have to talk about this stuff, because, we're seeing this very much, whatever language we want to use for it, all these organizations pretending, right? And saying that they're doing it, but they're really not changing who they are internally. So
I'd just like to add to that, because you just said that they're pretending. I think right now, especially for the LGBTQ community, we're seeing a lot of companies target Bud. I'm sure there. I think
Anheuser-Busch
and Anheuser-Busch, who have been putting rainbow logos over their brands for years, have been reaching out to the community and been getting the accusations of rainbow washing, but then pushing back because we do things all throughout the year. We're showing all kinds of support for the community. But the moment it gets a little bit hard, the moment that there's a little bit of pressure and it's hurting their revenue or it's hurting their stock price, they're bailing. They have the opportunity to say, no, we can't do this because it's too scary for us. Well, we can't. People of color can't. Trans people can't. Women can't. We still have to stick it out and put in the fight. The companies have the luxury of being able to say, we're not going to do this until it gets a little safer.
Yeah.
That is the epitome of what you're talking about. They've been pretending all along, and now they're showing their true colors. And so the accusations of rainbow washing were actually legitimate.
Yeah. And we all know this, right? All of us on this call, I'm sure, it's when you get in a tough situation, that's when you really figure out who you are. So let's not remember, right? Just because things are going well, that doesn't mean that, they're going to support you. And so really understanding who you're working with and who you're investing in, really, really matters. At the end of the day, we are an investment group. You are all about finance. So let's move into the topic of money. Caroline, by the way, I think did such a great job setting this up, prepping us, getting some good information. Only 44% of the LGBTQ plus community invest outside of their retirement accounts. Let that sink in. People who identify as LGBTQ plus were more likely to prioritize saving for home, car, family planning, while heterosexual individuals, adults, are prioritizing paying off debt and investing. So this is from Forbes. What is deterring, the investing? What is deterring that? What is that need or that drive for safety? Talk to us about that. And then let's also try to talk about how might we be able to change that?
Sure. I'll share another shocking statistic with you. Only 26% of individuals, of LGBTQ plus individuals, are actually contributing to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. So not only are we not investing,
wow,
we're not saving for retirement. Now you may, like you said, why is this happening? Well, John and I refer to this for one of the main reasons we refer to this as legacy financial exclusion. And this happens at a very early age for a lot of LGBT people. Yeah, it starts there. It starts with things like living in with a family that's not affirming, that is not supportive of who you are, means that you may live a double life. You live your true self when you're at school or you're outside of home, and you're a completely different person at home. And for some people, that actually is a financial cost. They decide that, okay, I need to live my true self at school, so I have a completely different set of clothes that I wear at school. And this isn't that I want to wear the short skirt or this particular kind of shirt at school. It's actually, I need to be my true self. And so these individuals are incurring costs, but it goes much further than that. We know that that LGBT individuals are less likely to receive financial support from their families when it comes to going to college. Many of them, and there's actually proof of this happening right now in the state of Florida, many of them are deciding to go out of state for school because they need to go to a place that's either far away from their family or far away from a state, or into a state where they feel like they can be themselves. We know what out-of-state schooling costs. It's much more expensive. That's why on average, we graduate with 16% more student loan debt. We're less likely to have help from our families with things like buying our first car, furnishing our first apartment. 47% of millennials, even today, some of them in their 40s, are still getting financial support from their parents. On average, $1,400 a month. If you don't have, if you have a family that adopted you, $1,400 a month, we're talking over $16,000 a year of financial aid that's coming from your family. And so that's where a lot of this starts. And then we add on top of this that a lot of us gravitate and move to places that we call cities of refuge or cities of safety. We move to places like San Francisco, New York, Chicago, LA, Denver. These are all expensive cities. So we don't have the average cost of the individual who's living in a 20,000 population town, but was able to buy their first home for $45,000, right? So there are all of those kinds of things are things that we are focusing on financially. And there's no room left for us to be able to focus on putting money into a retirement account or putting money into a savings account. And we are oftentimes then forced to really are thinking about, okay, safety, I need a home, right? That's what, for many Americans, that is what our safety is having a home that we own. It actually adds not only physical safety, but financial safety, because we can basically hold our living expenses at a certain level for extended periods of time.
Yeah, I think there's one other piece to it. And, just speaking to also women have this gap a lot of times of getting up that curve around investing. It's if you're not raised or, taught by your parents or, people from a younger age, kind of who say, and these are the basics of finance, and these are things you should do. If your company matches a 401k, absolutely fine. Don't go to SoulCycle, pay for the, put money in the 401k. If you're not learning those lessons because you don't look like somebody that they're going to start educating, you have to find that journey. So it's getting in the mindset, and it's also learning some of those baseline skills after the safety, I think, right? It's getting in that mindset.
100%. It's David and I often say that for a lot of LGBTQ folks, so I'll backtrack. The Different Guys Motley Fool LGBTQ plus money study that we published last year showed that 48% of LGBTQ plus respondents out of 2005 said that they've been discriminated against by somebody in financial services. And 44% of them have attributed their lack of financial well-being to that, in part to that discrimination. Now, nobody in America today would ever say that there's too much financial education in our schools. But then a lot the privilege that a lot of stale, male, and pale folks get is that they get to go to their financial advisor, and it feels like a boys' club. It feels like, oh, here's my buddy. He's going to help me invest. He's going to take me out for whiskey, and we're going to go play some golf. And that's their environment. They love it. But for a lot of LGBTQ folks, that's like going back into the locker room, or at least for those who identify as boys and who go into the locker room. I don't know what the experience is like for girls. But it was pretty brutal for a lot of us growing up and having to go to the gym class and go through that locker room. So a lot of us going to the financial advisor's office and having them help fill the gap for our lack of financial education because it wasn't provided in school or elsewhere is a scary proposition. So that's another reason why many of us aren't maybe engaging with financial services the way that we would all like our community to do, because it still feels like the old boys club, stale, male, and pale.
Yep. And by the way, if you don't have the background and you show up and it's, hey, educate me, like that's not really how it happens. There's kind of this assumption embedded that, okay, well, we'll manage your money, but are they going to teach you or say, and these are the things you need to really, do and know? And if there's this big gap, and if you're already stepping into a place of, wait, is this going to feel, culturally safe and like something that I can really, raise my hand and really speak up? How are you going to get there? Right. So I don't know. It's a big gap, I think, for so many of these communities where, we are underserved, we're underrepresented, we're not seeing ourselves, in these teams. And so how do you get up that curve? And I'll give another example, which is women after divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it doesn't have to be, a straight, white woman. It could be anybody, but stepping in and saying, I was never taught these things. And there's this big gap, and saying, well, how do I get up that curve? And recognizing, there's no real good place to go and say, okay, let me get up there. And maybe today it's a little bit different, right? We have resourcing, and, I think a lot more people stepping in and wanting to, help these gaps, but it still can be this very unfriendly, stepping into that, financial advisor's office or wealth manager and say, all right, what's going on? Because just because they tell you what's happening on, say, I don't know, a quarterly basis, that doesn't mean you're going to actually soak up any of that advice or that how you should, spend your money.
Yeah,
Right.
It is interesting. I think that the statistic is upwards of 60% of married women say that they will leave their financial advisor when their husband passes away. That should be shocking to those financial advisors. What are you doing wrong and we know what's happening really is that the conversation that happens in those offices is man to man rather than
right.
a man talking to a family, talking to both individuals and understanding the needs of both individuals. I'm not sure if you've ever connected with or talked with Tori Dunlap or read her book, The Financial Feminist. And Tori is a huge advocate for women, not only learning the basics, but also much of what you're doing here is to encourage individuals to go beyond the basics, because women are oftentimes asked to do the regression when it comes to finances. You need to save money on groceries. You need to figure out how we can stop spending so much money dining out. You need to stop getting your hair done. You need to stop going to get, it's always, you need to stop, you need to cut, you need to do this.
Yeah.
And men are always encouraged, grow. Go make more money, go make more money. And there should be no gender.
Right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that should be, if you need to cut back, it's everybody cutting back.
Yep.
If you need to make more money, everybody makes more money, right?
Yep.
And so we should be encouraging everyone towards that abundance rather than women being pushed towards scarcity.
Or the person, who again isn't making as much, but they may be bringing value in other ways. I mean, I think we just take that money mindset and we just apply it in such an unhealthy way based on gender. And again, it shouldn't be like that at all, to your point. Let's talk a little bit about, ramping up the curve. So if, we recognize there's these shifts that aren't going to happen overnight, there's real power gaps that exist today. Talk to the community about, what can you do to better integrate financial well-being into, our definition of self-care and how we show up, and recognizing, we need to invest in this to, really have confidence and authority and independence in life.
I think the starting place is that most people see taking care of your finances, budgeting, learning about money, all of that. They see that as a chore. They see that as difficult. They see that as something less enjoyable to do. But then we look at self-care and we think self-care is enjoyable, right? It's getting a massage. It's going to a therapist. It feels good. All that self-care feels good because more often than not, it feels good in the moment. But the reality is that taking care of your finances actually is self-care that lasts for a long period of time. It doesn't necessarily feel good right then immediately, unless you figure out how to have some wins, right? If you can have some wins. But the reality is, I think we need to shift this thinking that taking care of your finances isn't a chore. Taking care of your finances is actually self-care. You are taking care of yourself when you do these things. And the important thing about that is that means we have to learn, how do we do this self-care? How do we adopt this kind of self-care? And the nice thing is that there are a lot of more resources out there outside of the good old boys club that we now can tap into, whether that's personal finance blogs, podcasts, or books. For the folks in the LGBT community, would encourage you to listen to our podcast, the Queer Money podcast. And if you're not in the LGBT community and you're an ally, please listen to that podcast. Then there's also a podcast called Bad with Money with Gabe, and I'm forgetting Gabe's last name now.
Done.
Gabe Dunn. And that is an amazing podcast. Oftentimes focuses on minority communities, not just LGBT individuals, but also some books that we would encourage individuals to look at. Happy Money, Happy Life by Jason Weitag, Financial Feminist by Tori Dunlap, and The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I think all of those resources help people to understand or learn that there are benefits, lots of good benefits, de-stressing benefits, happy benefits, lifelong learning opportunities and benefits that come from turning financial chores into financial self-care.
And I think a big part of it too is getting used to talking about it with people. I think that we're often, women and queer, folks, people in any minority or marginalized group, we're encouraged to not talk about these things, whereas in the locker room, in the boys club, on the golf course, those are where those conversations are being had. And so finding a community, even if it's just finding your very first one-on-one, one person that you feel comfortable talking about it with, joining a group like She's Independent, where we are very open and we have honest conversations and we encourage people to get more comfortable and confident talking about it. Because I think the more that I'm a huge fan of the Queer Money podcast and have listened for a long time. And you all talk a lot about the way that the media helps distract us, right? Not only are we distracted by our personal safety and the amount of time and energy that it takes to make sure that we're safe, but then when we're logging into our phones or we're consuming media that's targeted toward women, it's usually about wellness and about our bodies and about our image. And then within the queer community, it's the 3 Ps that you guys talk about: pop culture, sex, things like this, rather than finding communities and inserting ourselves and actively trying to get more practice and conversation around us about financial well-being, about financial health, and just getting more comfortable talking about it. So then when you do go into the conversation with your boss and you need to negotiate a higher rate, you have that built-in confidence that we aren't inherently given based on the rooms that we're typically allowed into. And so I definitely, the podcast, just even if it's just listening to John and David talk about it, it still gives you the terminology to start using, and you can have a topic of conversation to maybe bring up at your next family dinner, if maybe that's too much too soon. But I think that getting used to talking about it and finding communities, two-sided, one-sided, that allow you the confidence to start, practicing that conversation is important too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're absolutely right. This idea of what we use, what we can take from the education we're learning and how to insert it into our lives on a daily basis or regular basis. If you're listening to our podcast, blame it on John and David. Say, I heard this on the podcast. I'm kind of surprised. You can wordsmith this, but I'm kind of surprised. What do you think about this? This kind of is kind of interesting. How do you think we could do this? You can use this as a way to start conversations in a very non-confrontational and non-aggressive way. Asking people for their opinion on something is one of the best ways to start a conversation. And if you want the conversation to be about money and non-confrontational, ask them, what is your opinion on this? And say, I heard this on a podcast. I read this in a book.
I'll add, I think it's the conspiracy theorist in me thinks that it's the patriarchy that wants everybody else to think it's rude or impolite to talk about money, so that they can continue to suppress us. So, an element of defiance is to talk about money because that's what they don't want us to do.
I love that. And talking about money truly is how I've made money in my life, right? And it's when you start getting comfortable, or at least testing those boundaries of and starting to have those conversations around data, around numbers, around money, you're getting higher pay, you're getting, better comp packages, you're navigating to, bigger and better things. But if you avoid those conversations, you're not talking about money, I guarantee it, you're leaving not only so much on the table, but you just you're not even going to be able to grow and learn, right? You have to have the conversations. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about investing and angel investing is, how do you start? And, one of the things that we say is you just have to jump in. And it's okay if you don't know anything, right? It's okay if you're just learning. It's okay if, you're asking questions, but I'm guessing, and I want to, I guess, pose this one. If somebody says, well, I'm not a finance person, I've never, learned the basics of personal finance. Is it kind of just having that mindset of, I'm going to just start, I'm going to start listening, I'm going to start investing in this? Is it just kind of putting that first foot in, and that's kind of the thing to do to change things?
Absolutely. It's never been easier than it is today to be a sort of a sleuth personal finance student, because you can listen to podcasts, you can read books or listen to books, you can watch YouTube videos, and nobody else has to know. You can do it all by yourself until you start to feel comfortable with it. And then it's also never been easier to start to become an investor than it is today. The robots are going to save our lives, right? You can start investing with as little as $5 a month in a Mint account, I think, or Acorns account. So you don't even, I think a lot of people think I have to have like thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to start investing. You don't. You can start with as little as $5. And if you can muster $5 a month, you can build on that. Then you can start dabbling in various kinds of investments. And on top of that, it doesn't have to be expensive anymore, because we have low cost index ETFs that are very low cost and don't even charge a commission. So start to dabble in that stuff. And until when you start to feel comfortable, then maybe expose to your family that you are a rock star personal finance expert.
I love it.
I think one of the other funny things is to remember, no one came out of the womb knowing anything about money or investing. Every single person that's out there at one time was, for lack of a better way of saying it, stupid when it came to money and investing, right? They learned it somehow, whether it was their circle of friends, from their parents, from going to college, from reading books. We are no different than them. We're no different than those individuals who have tons of knowledge, We also know that a lot of times people give off this perception of having a lot of knowledge, but they don't have a lot of knowledge, right? And so we can learn just as much as anybody else. The capacity of our brain is pretty much endless. So figure out a way to make it enjoyable. I think when I looked the other day, there are over 600,000 business themed podcasts. If you can't find one person in that group of 600,000 podcasts to listen to that is something that is someone that you enjoy their voice, that you enjoy the topics that they talk about, then you might want to give up. But you've got 600,000 podcasts to try, so go ahead and start trying.
Yeah, the resourcing really is incredible. One of the things that we talk about when it comes to angel investing, which is a really fun space to play, right? There's investing and allocating in public markets, and then private markets, which is this place where we know there are the power gaps that exist and the money flows that are going into diverse owned and queer owned businesses. It's disgusting. One of the things that we talk about as a women first angel group is what products don't exist or were made for men that don't fit our bodies as women, or I don't know, our hormones or what we need. And let's talk about that from the queer perspective. What products, what things are missing from the LGBTQ plus point of view in terms of where the funding is going. And if we're only funding, kind of the old, kind of white men and that patriarchy of, and this is what, power looks like, and this is what products we need. What are we missing? And how do we, what do we do about that?
I think that one of the things that we need to do as both individuals and mentally shift away from this, but also as corporations, whether you're a small corporation or even a massive corporation, is to shift away from this idea of a binary man, woman. One of the things that John and I were really alerted to over the last year when we did a podcast with a guest who is focusing on building systems for people who are transitioning is just how discriminatory phone service phone trees are. That when somebody calls in, that those systems are designed to recognize if you have a male voice or a female voice and either pass you through or ask you for more security questions. And that makes it more difficult for those individuals to actually get to the services that they need, or it takes them a longer time period, right? If you have to spend an extra 5 minutes for every single phone call you make into your bank, to your phone company, to your internet service provider, all of these, we know we make these kinds of phone calls on a regular basis, that is holding these individuals back. And is costing us time that we could be using for more beneficial things. And then this is another one that John and I are really kind of on the bad wagon right now, is that we as individuals and as communities, we need to stop supporting Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey we recently did a podcast on how LGBT rights are being attacked and where the funding is coming from that. And it starts with Dave Ramsey and the Methodist Church. And that is just the beginning of the cycle. We need to figure out how to cut the dragon's head off. And that's where the dragon's head is.
Yeah, we know, unfortunately, there are too many people who say they just hold their nose and they just deal with the financial literacy that he's trying to spread to them. But to David's point, there are so many other voices out there. Just with a little bit of Googling, you can find other people to give your money to and to get your advice from. And that would not only help those smaller businesses, but also help you by not feeling shamed by somebody who's trying to project stereotypes and shame on you.
It's a great point. And it's not just where we're allocating, angel dollars. It's where you're allocating, dollars on the day-to-day. It's what business are you supporting? It's being aware of and really an informed consumer of, where do I feel good, putting my capital? And by the way, we have, massive purchasing power. We have all these things that we can do when we come together. And so recognizing and advocating and saying, my dollars, every dollar I spend matters, that changes things.
Yeah. So the LGBTQ plus community, reported by Co-op Pride Co-op says that we have $1.4 trillion in purchasing power. And according to an Experian study, which I believe was 2016, I could be wrong, we're spending most of that on dining out, travel, and personal hygiene. If we just put 1% of that $1.4 trillion into a donor advised fund of our own, or into other LGBTQ businesses or startups, that would be more money than was collected in all the super PACs in 2020.
Wow.
A presidential election year. We could literally change the economy. We could change rights for LGBTQ plus people, women, minorities, people of color, all sorts of demographics, if we had a little bit of focus. And unfortunately, we're a little bit distracted, as we've alluded to earlier. We're distracted with our social media. We're distracted with trying to find safety and security. We're distracted with all the marketing that's trying to keep us distracted from what's really going on.
Yeah.
I'll add, we kind of talked about rainbow washing earlier, but I think that that's an important thing too. The LGBT individuals are not rainbows, and we are not rainbow magnets, right? We take pride in the rainbow because it speaks to the diversity of who we are as individuals, who we are as a community. But organizations and companies need to remember we exist 365. That's one of the hashtags we use, is we exist 365, right? So it's great that you have a same-sex couple with their kids in an advertisement on June 1st all the way through June 30th. But then when you drop it the rest of the year, that's performative, right? That is rainbow washing. It's important that we see ourselves not only in products and services that are being offered, but that those products and services are specific to our community all throughout the year. There are plenty of other times that you can engender our community as a small business owner, as a huge corporation. And we're asking you to play the long game, to invest in the community and do it for more than a year, right? It's not when we look at the way that companies decide to do something when it comes to supporting the LGBT community, oftentimes they like to dabble their feet in the pond, hoping for that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow to happen instantly, right? Okay, we're going to do an LGBTQ initiative. We're going to get out there and we're going to try to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, you know what? It didn't do great in the first 6 months. We're not going to stick with it, right? When we look at what companies, especially in the financial services industry, have done with women and people of color, is that they've invested in these communities for the long term, right? And we're asking for corporations to do the exact same thing with our community, because the reality is that we are dealing with all of those distractions, and it is going to take us some time to understand and also trust you that you are doing it for a true purpose of helping the community, not just to make a buck.
Yeah, specific to major corporations and startups within financial services, LGBTQ startups, at the end of this month, another LGBTQ bank, Daylight, will shut down. That will be the second bank and will be on our third LGBTQ credit union that has either gone nowhere or had to shut down. There have been several two LGBT ETFs, one PRID by UBS, and then LGBT by
LGBTQ index.
The LGBT index by, I can't remember the name of the firm. But there's another example of how all they've done is really sort of built it, and they didn't really do authentic outreach to the LGBTQ community. And so they're getting a lot of money from both within their corporation or from venture capitalist investors, and they're barely engaging the community in an authentic way. We were reached out to by UBS to help promote the Pride ETF. Again, they didn't want to give us any dollars. For some reason, they didn't have any marketing budget, but they weren't afraid to tell us that Martina Navratilova and Barney Frank were on the board of this ETF. However, they weren't willing to let one of them come on our show as a guest. So it's you're either going to spend those dollars wisely and authentically invest with the community, or don't waste your time spending those dollars. It's not just about the money. As David said, you have to put in authentic outreach to the community. You've got to build the trust with the community, because by and large, we don't trust you because you've not really given us a whole lot of reason to trust you. And then you need to stick it out for the long term. That's not just going to happen overnight. We're not going to go to bed the first date.
Love it. And great analogy. I know we've spent a great amount of time, digging in, and I know we have some people on live and we want to leave some time for if they have any Q&A. But anything we've missed, I know, with both of your backgrounds in the financial space and the journeys you've been on, is there anything we didn't touch on? Anything you want to share, favorite financial tips, or should everyone just tune into your show? So feel free to, you should do both, but, feel free if you have any tips you want to leave us with.
I think that this, especially for non-LGBTQ women in your group, I think that this definitely applies, but it also applies to individuals in our community as well. Please just start. Be your own prince or princess charming. You don't need a sugar daddy. You can do it all on your own, and just get started doing it. Arlen Hamilton comes to mind. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Arlen Hamilton, but she started Backstage Capital, which also does angel investing specifically focused on the LGBT community and people of color. And a couple of years before she quote unquote made it, she was literally couch surfing because she was homeless and didn't know anything about venture capital and anything like that. And within 3 years, she had started her own company that was specifically focusing on helping people of color and LGBT women get started with starting their own businesses. So if somebody like that, if somebody who is couch surfing and homeless basically can do that in that time period and has that motivation, all of us can use that as a motivator to do the same thing.
Her backstory is really interesting because before she was couch surfing, she would actually go on tour with different performers, Janet Jackson most specifically, and she was sort of the people behind the scenes that would help make the show go on. So after she was retired from that, that's how she started couch surfing, and that was the inspiration for her name, Backstage Capital. Carolyn kind of took one of my favorite tips, but my other favorite tip is, in addition to just start talking about money, the other is to figure out why talking about money, why learning about money, why researching about money is important to you. There's definitely an underlying reason to why that's important to you, and it's unique for all of us. If you can figure out what that is for you, that'll make whatever leaps and bounds you have to take to get to your goal that much easier, because that'll give you the motivation to stick with it.
Yeah, and I have to follow that point, which is when you have the why, you'll find a way. But for all of us, I think on this call, we're probably all here and have found strength and have found who we are in character through tough things. If everything was easy, would we have the passion? Would we have the grit? And there's something really brilliant about, what you can build on, when you go through tough things. So just because you were harassed, you weren't given that promotion, doesn't mean you can't do, everything to change the world. And arguably those events have allowed you to grow into the person, hopefully, that, you've become.
100%.
What a pleasure. You're both amazing. Caroline, if I've left things out, if you want to, further ask anything, if those who are on, I know we have some people on live. We even got a nice comment, even though she had to drop earlier, but if anyone has thoughts, questions, we welcome it. And this was such a pleasure.
I will just say, and I will screen this from rooftop, but if you only have time to listen to one Queer Money podcast, which they're not even that long, so we should listen to all of them, but the one on how the under-advised funds are harming the LGBTQ community, really changed my perception on just personal financial, advising, and how our community is just missing the mark with where we're allocating our money and everything. So I highly recommend that one. It'll get you fired up, which I think is a good thing.
So that's episode.
That one,
Sorry. That's episode 386 of the podcast. And in fact, that finally got the attention of the industry. Financial Planning, which is a magazine, just published an article based on that episode. And they actually reached out to several of Kingdom Advisors partners to get quotes for why they put their rainbow logos up and they support the LGBTQ community, but then they're partners with this company that is putting billions of dollars a year into anti-LGBTQ, anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim donor advised funds. And there was just a complimentary article published in The Guardian about how Alliance Defending Freedom, about how much money that they have, billions of dollars, and how they're using it to take away women's rights and LGBTQ rights. And there should be a follow-up article coming in the next couple of weeks from the New Republic. So that's starting to get some traction within financial media.
Good.
You know, money has such influence. So I'm so excited and, you know, feel honored to play in this space and to know people like you all where we're stepping into our power. You know, nothing's going to change if we don't ultimately step into money. So that's what we got to do.
It is unfortunate that we do live in a world where money still does equal power. And that does mean that if we want to change things, we do have to have some money to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. But recognizing it, you know, and finding our pathing to it. At the end of the day, it's not that we're going to amass a bunch of capital and say, oh my gosh, you know, I'm so amazing because I have this money. It's what can we do with it? And I think people that have had the tough journeys and that see the power gaps, you know, being able to say, well, I'm going to invest in more, you know, underserved and underrepresented founders. I mean, that feels brilliant. And so it really does create, you know, not only a better world, I think, but ultimately, you know, it changes, you know, it changes the future and it changes, you know, the world for the next generation. So, I never thought I was going to play Back in Money, but here I am, and I'm really proud and happy to be here. Anyone have any questions, thoughts? I also have a comment from somebody who had to hop if not. All right, so I'll quickly mention the comment from Paige, who was on earlier before we kicked off the recording, and she was saying, and this was just kind of this eye-opening thing that Caroline and I said, she's very well networked, and she said she couldn't think of a queer CEO. Another queer CEO. She literally couldn't think of one.
There are four in the Fortune 500. There are four. Tim Cook of Apple. Dow Chemical. I can't remember his name. The woman who runs. There's a woman CEO, lesbian CEO of. Actually, I think she identifies as bisexual. Land O'Lakes, the butter dairy company, and I'm gonna forget the last one, but there's one more. Most of the minority groups, we are the least represented. I will say I don't think that there's a single Native American CEO, and I don't think that there are any Pacific Islander CEOs either, but we're at the bottom when it comes to all the others, and we need to change that, or we want to change that.
Absolutely. Well, what a pleasure. If there's no more questions or comments, I guess we'll give you back a few minutes, but thank you so much. And Caroline, when you introduced this, you didn't introduce yourself. So I'm going to say Caroline Rice.
Nope.
Incredible. She's the CMO she's independent, and we're thrilled to have her and really excited to just have these conversations, put out good content, insight to the founder community, to, you know, future and upcoming investors. And we're so thrilled to do what we do. And so we, you know, hope to hear from you. If you have questions, thoughts out of today, please be in touch. We will share the recording, and, you know, really looking forward to making an impact with other organizations like you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this opportunity. We appreciate the platform to get our message out.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.